there's like I think the other session is open on my computer. I'm just gonna close that one. I think we can begin now. Can you see my screen? I think so. Can you see my screen properly now? Hello. Okay. Well, I'm guessing you can see my screen now, so I'll just resume the presentation. Before anything, thanks everyone for joining in this presentation. I would like to outline a couple of lessons that I've learned previously on how you can optimize the images that you add on your website or on your web app in order to improve user experience overall. So like it's been said, my name is Ivan Bila. I'm a web developer. I'm currently working at a telecom company called Vodacom. I am working on a team called Bazara that's working on an e-commerce website where we try to connect vendors to sellers in order to buy and sell goods. Like I said before, my name is Ivan Bila. I work at Bazara. My Twitter handle is Ivan Bila. So should you have any questions that maybe we're not able to answer due to time, or if you want to connect, you can reach me out on Twitter. On LinkedIn, it's the same handle. It's just Ivan Bila. Another thing is just all the views, the views are my own. Like everything that I'm gonna say here, I'm not gonna break any NDA. I'm not gonna leak any secrets. Most of these things are things that I learned in the workplace, or I learned in my own research and development in private. So for those, actually Mozambique is actually pretty close to Tanzania. So I'm here in Mozambique. I'm in Maputo, which is the capital of Mozambique, and yeah, I'm hoping after the COVID, I'm able to visit Tanzania and check out how the communities are doing there and stuff. The first thing, before I try to explain the technical parts of it, like how to improve images, all those nerdy stuff, I think it's really important for us to explain why should you care, why should you optimize the images of your site, why should you care at all, and why should you spend resources in doing such thing. So I'm going to try to explain as the why behind you caring about image optimization when you could be working on other important features. So the first thing is this is a loading bar. I'm not sure like if you're really aware. I think everyone everyone here has seen this at some point in their browsing time. Like you see something spinning that says something is loading and you have to wait, and it's really frustrating to keep waiting for something like this. So I would say the first reason that developers should everyone else, developers and designers should care about the image, about optimizing images for the web, it's that the larger the image, the more time it takes to download, to decode, and to paint for the user. So I would say that's really important, because how the user feels when he uses your application, if it feels slow or if it uses too much data, it might end up influencing his decision on keep using your product or using someone else's product. So another thing is, like in the web, there's currently a need for speed, especially here in the African continent, where most of the devices and the internet is not really reliable and it's not fast. Most of the users use mobile internet, and the devices are not fast as well. For instance, I was working on this website that had 250,000 registered users and about 1 million visits every month, and the devices that the users had in their possession were not quite fast. So that can also determine how much that can also determine how we developers should behave towards this situation. Uh, when I was working on this on the website with 250,000 registered users and, and about 1 million monthly visits, most of the about 40% of the users were using a smartphone that resembles this smartphone, like that was in this family of smartphones. This is a smartphone with 500 megabytes of RAM, I think two gigabytes of internal storage. I think it can only reach for 3G, among other limitations. So while developing the apps, we had to keep in mind that about 40% of our users are using a smartphone that resembles this one. So it has its own limitations. So we had to act accordingly if we wanted to keep users satisfied on our website. So another reason why you should care about the web performance about large images is that in the African continent, this is actually a research, there's a link on the presentation, where it's the continent where the internet is the most expensive. This is a graph of how much a gigabyte can cost depending on the country that you are in. So like if you look at the graph, you can see that internet is 1 gigabyte is quite expensive in the African continent. So internet is not something that is easy and it's not available to everyone. Even for those who can afford it, they can't afford. It's very likely that they can't afford much of it. So we really have to think about how we build our websites to accommodate to this reality that is of the African continent, that most users, the internet is very expensive and most users don't even have reliable internet. So another reason why you should care about the image size. This is actually a really interesting fact. Like most of at least 50% of the websites. This is a stat from the HTTP archive, which is a website that gathers information from a variety of websites, and then they put in one place and then try to get insights from the data. So this is one of the inside, like a median web page is about 1.5 megabytes, and in those 1.5 megabytes, 800 kilobytes are images. So, and 350 kilobytes are generally JavaScript files. And then there's people probably saying 800 plus 350, like it's not a very big difference. And also 800 kilobytes is not like a lot of, is not too large, but depending on your user target, depending on how many times you visit your site, depending whether you cache the images or not, that 800 kilobyte can be quite significant hit for the user. So images are very important. While this statistic does not mean that the images take longer to process than JavaScript files, because obviously here the heaviest resource in terms of computing power is still the JavaScript files, because it has many other steps in order for it to be executed on the device, whereas the images have fewer steps. But I think here, in terms of the bytes that are transmitted through the wire, images are usually the most expensive resource on the website. So this is actually pretty interesting, because the total size of Super Mario, I don't know if any of you has played Super Mario ever, but this was one game that was quite a hit. The total size of the Super Mario game was 32 kilobytes. So I don't know how much value your website is transmitting with this 1.5 megabytes and 800 kilobytes of just images. And whereas the Super Mario video game, it had many levels, different interaction, and a lot of things going, and it had only 32 kilobytes. Just to see like the huge difference, like where we are now compared to where we were before. And also another interesting fact is just this image, just the image has 100 kilobytes. Like this image is larger than the entire Super Mario game, which is a game that you could play for months, maybe years, depending on how you played it. And like what has been happening throughout the years is that images keep getting larger and larger, and if we developers don't take some sort of action to optimize these images, our users are going to suffer on our website. So now I'll start explaining like how can you optimize the image and stuff. The first thing I would like to is every time you're trying to add the image to your website, you should make like this the following questions before you just add a hero image. I know we all feel tempted to just add a hero image to our website, the shiny image from Unsplash, that image that the designer made. But before adding an image to our website, you should ask the following questions. Is an image really required to achieve the effect? Isn't there any other way that I can achieve the same effect without bringing in an image? And do you really need that hero image on your website? Is that really something does it provide any value to the users aside of just aside of visual aesthetics? Does it mean anything to the user? And if your answer is yes to both questions, probably you should ask the third question, which image format or resolution is more appropriate for this purpose. So depending on the image that you want to add, you probably have to you would probably have to have a certain resolution, and also you should think about, are you going to use the same image to all devices? So generally, I think there's not actually a need to add an image. There's other ways we can achieve this effect, but as developers, since this became a habit of just putting an image on everything, because most people say like an image is worth a thousand words, but something that we don't really pay attention to is what's the cost of the image. Like, we know it's worth 1,000 words, but what's the cost for the users? Is it something that's really costly without providing the value that is expected from the image? So I think before you add an image, you should think about these questions. If any of them is no, or all of them is no, you probably shouldn't add an image. Try to come up with a different way to achieve the same effect. So now, one thing before you jump on optimizing image, you have to understand that the different image types, and depending on the image type, you might have to use a certain technique and a different technique to other image types. So this is an oversimplification, but I think it works for developers. But when you're building for the webs, usually you should worry about two image types, which are the raster image format and the vector image format. The raster image format usually are like images taken out of a camera, or someone made a design on Photoshop of an image and then they export it to a raster image format. Generally, these images are comprised of RGB pixels, which are red, green, and blue pixels, and they'll join to form up an image. A vector image format, it's usually a file that contains instructions of how the browser can interpret those instructions and kind of paint vectors on the browser. So each of these image formats has its own purpose. So while there are many versions of vector image formats, I think on the web, at least the most widely used, or the one that's supported, is SVG. I'm not sure about these other ones, but I just wanted to add them to signal that there are other vector image formats. So this is probably a vector image format. This is a raster image format, which is mainly comprised of pixels, which signal red, green, and blue. On SVG, I think if you are a developer, you probably at some point have worked with SVG, or you've seen SVG on a website, which is a vector image format. Some sources say that SVG is not just an image format; it's actually a document format, which is something that's not it's not in this presentation context. So the first thing you should do with SVG, most of the SVG files come from a designer. So you probably want to screenshot this and then just share with your designer. Like the first thing is not use overly complex shapes when creating like the SVG. On I think on Adobe Illustrator there are some optimizations that you can use. Depending, designers usually know how to make this optimization, which not using overly complex shapes, among other things, when you're exporting the SVG file. Another thing you can do to optimize SVG images, there's actually a node library called SVGo, which you can use to optimize the SVG image. The SVGo does things like taking the styles inside of the style tag on the SVG document, which is a XML document, an XML file. It takes the styles and adds them inline, and does a couple of other optimization. Another thing you can do to an SVG file is just minify it, since the browser can also interpret like minified SVG files, so there are no issue in minifying it. So you can actually minify an SVG file because it's an XML document that can be easily minified. And also one thing you can do, like instead of using for your logos on your website, things like logos, icons, if you prefer, so you can actually use SVG for that and add a PNG image fallback, depending on what you're trying to show on the website. So if you're supporting something like IE, there are many different ways of adding SVG file and a PNG fallback, or a different kind of fallback. One of the ways is just using the background property for CSS. You can use the object. I think you can also use the picture tag to add the fallback for SVG. But one thing you can do for your icons or for your logos is just use SVG files. They tend to be smaller in size, since it's a text file, and the browser can actually increase the size of SVG file without it losing quality, unlike a raster image file like PNG or JPEG. So you can make it as large as you want or as small as you want, because it's a text image, it's a text file that the browser knows how to interpret it. So this is how you can add like an SVG and a PNG fallback using CSS. You can do this with HTML as well. And this is how you would use the picture tag, which is you just add the picture tag for the SVG. You add the first source. I think here you add the first source, and then you instruct the type of the image, and then you add the PNG fallback. On the PNG, depending on the browser, if the browser doesn't support the SVG format, it will just jump to the PNG image format. Another thing you can do is add something called the image lazy loading, the idea of image lazy loading is like, don't download this image unless I need to see it. So if an image is way up, is way on the bottom, like the browser is not going to download it right away before you scroll it. You scroll to see that image, because depending on the page, the user might not even reach the point at which that image is loaded. So I think image lazy loading is actually a pretty good addition for the web. Currently, there's two ways of doing image lazy loading. There's native image lazy loading, and then there's a different way you can use scripts, and you can use JavaScript to lazy load an image. So if you're using Firefox, I think Firefox 80 and Chrome 80, this feature is supported. You can just test it, just add an image, and then you add the attribute called loading. And when you add lazy, the browser will not download the image unless it's visible on the page. So it only downloads the visible images on the page. If you scroll, it will it will do some sort of calculations to kind of get the image and show what before after you scrolling. Another thing you can do, this is actually not the name image optimization tip, is to prevent something called reflow. So the browsers have something called reflow, which is when you add something to the document object model, the browser has kind of to recalculate everything to add the node that you just required to add, and to calculate the space which that node is gonna take, and to move everything on the page so you can add that node. So in order to prevent the thing called the reflows on the website, you can add these two attributes for the width and the height on the page. So when you add the width and the height, the browser already knows that, oh, this image is going to take 200 pixels of width and height. So I'm going to reserve this 200 pixels of width and height on the side, so I don't have to recalculate everything. So another value of the attribute loading is auto, which is the default value. The browser will decide if it's going to download this image now or it's going to download it later. So the third one is eager. So I think this one is I think it's a bit unnecessary in a way, because eager just assumes that you want to download the image right away. So I'm not really sure when you would use eager, because I think eager is the default behavior of the image source tag. So there's that. This is just an outline of the lazy loading feature browser support. Currently, it's only supported mostly on Chrome. Almost every other browser doesn't support this feature. So I think before adding native image lazy loading, you should consider this, the browser support. If this is something that you want to add to your site or not, depending on your audience, they might have a different kind of support. For instance, here, globally, only 75% of the users support this feature. And also in Can I Use, you can actually upload, you can actually link your website's analytics and Can I Use, and Can I Use, and it will sort of tell you, like, on your website, only 30% of the users have compatible browsers with this feature. An alternative to native lazy loading is actually a library called Lazy Sizes, which is really interesting. It works almost in every browser. So the idea of the lazy size is that you add the image, you add this data attribute to HTML, you add data char set, and then the image that you want. So lazy size will then decide when is the appropriate time to fetch the image and show it to the user. This technique of lazy loading image works almost with every browser. So I think this could be more useful on your case, unlike the native lazy loading, which is not widely supported. Another thing to notice here is that you can actually use multiple image formats. You can there's something called the picture tag. The picture tag serves for many purposes, but in this case, you can use it to download. To check if the device or the browser supports a given image format. If the device or if the browser does not support the image, that given image format, you can add a fallback. You can add as many fallbacks as you want. So in this case, he's checking, does the device support WebP? If the device supports WebP, download the WebP image. If it supports a JPEG, download the JPEG image. If the browser supports, if the browser if the browser does not support the picture tag, just get me the image. So the picture tag is actually really important in the image optimization, because depending on the device that the user is using, you can fetch the image that's appropriate for the browser, that the browser can understand. Another way to achieve this would be to do configurations on the server. You can actually do configurations on the server based on the headers and the browser. You can actually return the image that you can return the image that the browser supports. The advantage of doing it on the server is that your markup will not be large or bloated like this one, because you would have to have many picture tags on your page, which can make your markup larger. Depending on the circumstances, hard to maintain. So yeah. There's another technique which is like preloading images. Like, go and download the image. Like, don't wait for the page to finish parsing. Go and download the image right away. You can use this snippet, which is like preload the image, and then here is the image. This is an interesting chance to explain the responsive image, like downloading the image for a given device, not having the same image for all devices. So in this case, in this image source set, just specifying if the device width is 400 pixels, go and get this image, else go get the other one, else just get the other image. um Another thing about raster image format, the first thing is like choose the right format of image. There are many different kind of raster image format. There's png, there's png8, there's jpeg, there's webp, different kind of image formats, each with its advantages and disadvantages. So I would advise you to choose the right image format, or just use multiple image formats with fallbacks for devices that are using old browsers. There's also something that you can do is to use compression tools. Raster image format generally have a lot of meta, aside of the image data itself on the file, they have a lot of metadata in them. So these image compression tools, they delete the metadata inside of the image, and they do some optimizations that are really hard to tell, just that are almost so they can do two types of compression: the the lossless compression and the lossy compression. On the lossless compression is like they generally just delete the metadata and other things on the image file itself, without compromising quality, like without changing the image quality. And then you have the the lossy compression. In the lossy compression, you kind of you can specify what is the percentage of quality of the image that you want to keep. Is it 80%, 7%? Depending on which method you use, you're going to have different gain on image size. Like I was saying, another tip for optimizing raster image is use responsive images. Like the image you show on the desktop shouldn't be the same image that you're going to show on the phone, because the device screens are pretty different, and I have reason to believe that even the internet used can be different. So there's no use in displaying 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels image on the phone. You can work on a responsive image which can be smaller in resolution and in size. This is one way you can add like responsive image, is to use the source set and size attribute, which you can set up. You can kind of you can specify which sizes should you serve for which devices. Another thing is you can use modern image format like a VIF and WebP, which have a better compression rate. I think WebP has a 30% compression, 30% compression advantage compared to JPEG. So a WebP image is very likely to be 30% smaller than a JPEG image. Same, then a VIF has also its own compression benefits. So one thing you can do is just to use a modern image format with better compression ratios. So you can add them to the page using the picture tag or making changes to the server. So this is how you would add a VIF, WebP, and then lastly a PNG image fallback. I think that's it. Thank you. There's also this tool online called Scoosh, which you can do tests on images. I have an image here. I have this image which is 1 megabyte. I'll add to Scoosh. It's actually a pretty large image. This image has 1.3 megabytes. So if I add to Scoosh, it's a raster image format. If I add here to Scoosh, I can kind of pick and choose which image format I would like to apply to it. And then in this case, I'll choose WebP. So I can just select WebP. It will take some time to compress the image, and I can also select the effort at which I want the device to have. I can increase the effort, and I can select the quality of the percentage of the quality of the image I want to keep. The thing of Scoosh is that it lets you compare the compressed image and the uncompressed image, so you can kind of see the difference. And also it shows you how smaller the image is. So here we went from a 1 megabyte image to a 300 kilobyte image, and depending on my preferences, I can make this 70% of the quality of the image, which will make the image smaller. So you can use Squoosh to do the test on the image size that you want for your website. There's also a different another tool called CWebP. CWebP is a CLI that you can use to compress your image to WebP using the terminal. So you can install CWebP in something like on your server. So you can compress images like JPEG and other image formats to WebP. And there's also SVGo and then other tools that you can use to compress your images and try to make and try to improve user performance. I think that's all for my presentation. Should you have any questions?
You can drop them in the chat.
Hi, Frank. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was a very informative session. Does anyone in the chat who has a question for Ivan?
Anyone?
So we can ask him right now.
You're talking about
Okay, so there is one question from Mohammed Mneta. What about working with animations like GIF?
Okay. GIF or GIF?
Is there any way?
Interesting. That's a nice question. So my take on GIF is that don't use them. That is the first thing. Like, don't use GIFs on your site. GIFs actually an image format, but it's actually on the web. People have been using it for a different purpose. Since you can sort of animate GIF images, some people just take GIF images tend to be larger than videos. So I would propose, instead of using something like GIF, use video. There's actually, I think I have an example on how you can use video, how you can make video behave like GIF. So my take would be not to use GIF. Use something like video, but uh, add the same behavior to video than GIF. I'll share my screen. I have like a snippet of code for that. The main problem with GIF is that GIF is like a lot of images put together. So you kind of like, the browser has to go through a lot of steps to decode the GIF file, and then so it becomes the cost of adding GIF is greater than the benefit. So I'm sharing my screen now to show the code snippet. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see my screen? So if you can see my screen, like this is how you can use a video to behave like a GIF or a GIF, depending on how you want to say it. So you can you can take the video tag and then just add autoplay, loop, and mute it, and then play inline. So what this will do is it will take a video and it have the same behavior as the GIF. So adding a video instead of using a GIF has more advantages. Like, videos tend to be smaller, and actually GIF images are actually very heavy on decoding. So not only they're larger, but they're actually slower to display on the browser, whereas videos are more appropriate for that purpose. And you can actually, there are optimized video formats like WebM and MP4. So you can select, you can sort of add both of them depending on the browser compatibility. The browser can use WebM or it can use MP4. So this video will behave like a GIF or a GIF. Any
Okay, thank
question?
you, Ivan. There's another question. Are there instances when browsers do not support autoplay until the user gives permission?
Autoplay on video does not need permission. As far as in my tests, autoplay for video does not need permissions. I think for audio as well does not need permission. So I've tested the using the video to replace the GIF, and I haven't seen any issues.
Okay, thank you. There's also another question from Nelson Frank. Creating app like Instagram, what is your recommendation on image formats and any technique to improve performance?
Okay. I've never thought of creating a website like Instagram, but maybe the first thing that you should do is like the is kind of when the user uploads the image, you kind of have to separate, like you get the image, and then you separate the metadata from the image from the actual image, and then you keep the image without the metadata, because I think that's what Instagram does. When you upload the image, they delete the metadata from the image, and then they save to their own, that this is my assumption, to their own database. So that makes the image slightly smaller. Another thing is changing the resolution of the image, because devices now, when you take a photo, the image has actually a very large resolution. Another thing that you can do is to change the resolution of the photo. And lastly, you can use the image format like WebP or a VIF, depending on the device that you're using. So that will sort of improve the performance of the image. Another thing you can add is lazy loading the images. Since you're on Instagram, generally someone will be scrolling the feed, or will be scrolling the profile. So you don't have to preload all the images right away. You can actually lazy load the images, and as the user scrolls, the image will be loading. This is something that's doable on the presentation. There's a snippet where you can use native lazy loading, or you can use a library like lazy sizes. I'll share my screen now to show that specific part. So here on my screen, you can use something like native lazy loading. So here's native lazy loading. You can select one of these. I think for this case, you want something like loading lazy. If your users browsers do not support lazy loading, which is a very recent addition, you can use something like lazy sizes, which is JavaScript library that achieves the same purpose but only using JavaScript. So you can use lazy loading as well. So the first thing is delete the metadata from the image, store it somewhere else, and compress the images, change the resolution, and change the resolution, and use a image format that can deliver the same or closer result, but with the better sizes. Something can be something like WebP or JPEG or something on those lines. I don't know, like, if most of us have used WhatsApp here, but if you pay close attention to WhatsApp, they actually compress the images. The only issue with WhatsApp, I think, they are very heavy on image compression, but they compress the images. They try to make them smaller to deliver value, and also not have that being a huge cost on the user. So depending on your users, you can do tests like which compression rates work for users, which compression rates compromise the least quality, while keeping the size is bearable.
Okay, thank you, Frank. I'm Ivan. Sorry, I don't know why I keep saying that. Thank you so much. Muhammad Imnete says thank you so much again. It was a great talk. Thank you so much, Ivan, for joining our DevFest. We hope to have you again next year. Thank you.
Thank